Imagine being the girl who saved the future deliverer of Israel. A young Miriam watches as Pharaoh's daughter pulls baby Moses from the river. She holds her breath. Will her plan work? Years later, that same girl is now a prophetess. She lifts her tambourine, leading thousands in a song of victory as the Red Sea swallows their enemies. She is celebrated, honored until pride creeps in. One mistake changes everything. She challenges Moses' leadership, and suddenly, the woman who once led in song is silenced by leprosy. Cast out. Forgotten. What happened to Miriam? Why did she rise so high, only to stumble so hard? Her story holds a powerful lesson, one we need today more than ever. The story of Miriam is found in the book of Exodus 2 verses 1 to 10, Exodus 15 verses 20 to 21 and Numbers 12 verses 1 to 16. Let's dive in. The Egyptian sun cast a golden hue over the reeds by the Nile. A young girl, no more than 10, crouched low, her small hands gripping the tall grass as she peered through the swaying stalks. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The baby's cries had grown fainter, and for a terrifying second, she wondered, had she come too late? Had the river already claimed him? Then, the sound of voices. Egyptian voices. Miriam barely breathed as she saw Pharaoh's daughter and her maid step into the water. The princess moved with the grace of royalty, but when her eyes landed on the basket floating among the reeds, her entire posture changed. She gestured for a servant to retrieve it. Miriam's tiny fingers clutched the grass so hard they nearly snapped. Please, please. The basket was opened. A baby's wail pierced the air. The princess gasped. This is a Hebrew child, she murmured. Silence. Would she toss the baby into the water, as Pharaoh had commanded? Miriam couldn't wait any longer. Summoning every ounce of courage, she darted from her hiding place, her bare feet kicking up the sand. She ran straight to the princess and, without hesitation, spoke. Shall I fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse him for you? The princess, eyes still locked on the wailing child, nodded. Yes, find me one. Miriam turned and sprinted home, her breath hitching with excitement. Moments later, she returned with Jochebed, the baby's real mother. Moses would not die. He would live, grow, and though Miriam couldn't have known it then, one day return to break the chains of Egypt itself. And it had all begun with a little girl who dared to watch, wait, and act at just the right time. Years passed. The timid girl hiding in the reeds became a bold woman, standing among the children of Israel. By now, Moses had returned. 10 devastating plagues had broken Egypt's power. The Red Sea had parted before their eyes, and a nation of former slaves had walked across on dry ground. And Miriam? She stood in front of them all, tambourine in hand, her voice ringing out in triumph. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. Exodus 15 verse 21. Women joined her, dancing, their laughter echoing across the desert. The joy was electric. This was victory. No longer the girl in the reeds, Miriam was now a leader, a prophetess, the first woman in the Bible given such a title. She had watched the power of God up close, and she led others to praise him for it. But victories have a way of making people forget. And for Miriam, forgetting would cost her dearly. Time passed. The wilderness stretched endlessly before them, and leadership was hard. Moses, her little brother, the one she had watched over as a baby, was now the leader. He was the one hearing directly from God. The one making decisions. The one people looked up to. And then, he married a Cushite woman. Miriam's heart burned with frustration. She and Aaron, the high priest, had stood by Moses' side all these years. Wasn't she also a prophet? Hadn't she been part of Israel's deliverance from the beginning? Why should Moses be the only one who spoke for God? Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Miriam and Aaron whispered together. Hasn't he also spoken through us? Numbers 12 verse 2. But their words didn't go unnoticed. The Lord heard them. And he wasn't pleased. Suddenly, the voice of God thundered, calling them forward. Miriam and Aaron stepped forward only to see Moses standing between them. God's voice rang through the camp. When there is a prophet among you, I reveal myself in visions, but with my servant Moses, I speak face to face. Numbers 12 verses 6-8. A chill ran down Miriam's spine. Then, the presence of God lifted, and as Aaron turned to his sister, his face twisted in horror. Miriam's skin was white as snow. Leprosy. The woman who once led Israel in song now stood diseased, isolated, unclean. The one who had saved her baby brother's life was now at risk of losing her own. Aaron cried out to Moses, "Please, my lord, do not hold this sin against us." Moses, her brother, whom she had doubted, immediately interceded for her. "Lord, please heal her." God's reply was firm. If her father had spit in her face, wouldn't she bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp. Miriam, once celebrated, was now cast out, forced to live in isolation for 7 long days. It was a lesson in humility. A reminder that pride, even among God's chosen, can bring devastating consequences. And yet, grace was not absent. When her time of isolation ended, she was restored. She was welcomed back. Israel waited for her, but she was never the same. The Bible doesn't tell us much about the rest of Miriam's life. She fades into the background, her once prominent voice now silent in the scriptures. And then, in Numbers 20 verse 1, her story quietly comes to an end. Miriam died and was buried in Kadesh. No fanfare, no songs, no final words. But her impact, it remained. She was the girl who watched. She was the woman who sang. She was the leader who stumbled. And yet, God still used her. Her story is one of boldness and failure, courage and correction, leadership and humility. Here are 5 insightful lessons from the life of Miriam. 1. Miriam was just a young girl when she took a bold risk that changed history. While other Hebrew women wept over their lost sons, she positioned herself at the Nile, watching over baby Moses. Instead of shrinking back in fear, she courageously approached Pharaoh's daughter and orchestrated a way for Moses to be nursed by his own mother. What if she had been too scared to act? What if she had chosen silence? Miriam teaches us that courage isn't always found in dramatic battles or fiery speeches, it's often in the quiet moments of watching, waiting, and speaking up at the right time. She didn't have the power of a king, but she had faith, strategy, and bravery. In our lives, there will be moments when we are faced with a choice: step out in faith or remain silent in fear. Sometimes, we think our small acts of obedience don't matter, but what if the decision we make today sets the stage for someone else's deliverance tomorrow? We don't have to be in positions of power to make a difference. God uses those who are willing to take action, no matter how small their role may seem. Think about it. What are the small but significant ways you can act courageously today? Maybe it's standing up for the truth in your workplace. Maybe it's sharing encouragement with someone who's struggling. Maybe it's mentoring a young believer. Like Miriam, your faithfulness in small things might be preparing the way for something greater than you can imagine. 2. Miriam wasn't just Moses' sister, she was a leader, a prophetess, and a worshipper. After Israel's miraculous deliverance through the Red Sea, she led the women in song, praising God for his mighty hand. Why does this matter? Worship wasn't just an emotional reaction, it was leadership. By lifting her voice in praise, Miriam set the tone for an entire generation to acknowledge who truly deserved the glory. She didn't take credit for the victory. She didn't glorify Moses. She pointed Israel back to God. This teaches us something powerful about worship. It's not just about singing, it's about leading others to recognize God's faithfulness. Every time we worship, whether in private or in public, we declare who is really in control. Many times, we seek leadership positions for influence, recognition, or success. But Miriam reminds us that true leadership starts with a heart of worship. When we put God at the center, we lead with humility, clarity, and divine authority. However, what happens when we stop worshiping? Later in life, Miriam shifted from leading in praise to challenging Moses' authority. Could it be that when we stop focusing on God's greatness, we become more focused on our own importance? Worship keeps our hearts aligned. It reminds us that we serve a power greater than ourselves. If you want to be an effective leader in your home, your church, or your workplace, start with worship. Ask yourself, what does my worship life say about my leadership? 3. Miriam was a powerful woman of God. She was a prophetess, a leader, and someone who had seen miracles firsthand. Yet, even spiritual maturity doesn't make us immune to pride. When she and Aaron spoke against Moses, their argument wasn't just about his marriage to a Cushite woman, it was about power. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Numbers 12 verse 2. Miriam had walked closely with God, yet she became resentful when Moses was given a greater level of authority. How often do we fall into the same trap? We see someone else promoted, given opportunities, or recognized for something we feel we deserve. And suddenly, pride creeps in. We start to compare. We start to criticize. We begin to think we know better. But here's the danger: God does not take pride lightly. When Miriam challenged Moses, God immediately called her out. The punishment was severe leprosy, a disease that left her unclean, isolated, and stripped of her position. Pride isolates us. It removes us from the presence of God and from community. So, how do we guard against pride? Remember that God's calling is unique for everyone. Moses had his role, and Miriam had hers. Celebrate others instead of comparing. Someone else's success is not your failure. Stay humble in leadership. No matter how much experience we have, we are still under God's authority. If pride could bring down a woman as strong as Miriam, we must be vigilant to keep our hearts in check. 4. When Miriam sinned, God could have simply corrected her with words. Instead, he struck her with leprosy. It was a painful, humiliating punishment. But why did he do it? Because God disciplines those he loves. Miriam's sickness was not just about her, it was a lesson for all of Israel. Pride and rebellion could not be tolerated among God's people. If God had ignored her sin, it would have spread like a disease, weakening the entire nation. God still disciplines us today, not with leprosy, but through situations that force us to recognize our weaknesses. Sometimes it's a loss. Sometimes it's being humbled in front of others. Sometimes it's a season of waiting. But here's the good news: discipline is not rejection. Miriam was not abandoned. Though she was cast out for 7 days, Israel did not move forward without her. They waited. They mourned. Her brother interceded for her. In the same way, God's discipline is always redemptive. He corrects us, but he also restores us. If you're in a season of discipline, don't mistake it for rejection. God is refining you. Like Miriam, you might stumble, but you are not beyond God's grace. The question is, will you learn from it? 5. Miriam's life had 3 major phases. 1. She saved a life. She watched over Moses and set him on a path to deliver Israel. 2. She led in worship. She guided the women of Israel in praising God after the Red Sea. 3. She stumbled. She let pride take hold, spoke against Moses, and suffered the consequences. And then, she faded into the background. When she died in Numbers 20 verse 1, her passing is recorded without fanfare. No great mourning. No final song. What does this teach us? It's not enough to start strong, we must finish strong. Miriam's early years were full of courage, faith, and leadership, but her later years were marked by pride and correction. We all have the power to influence others. We all have moments of great faith. But how we finish matters just as much as how we begin. So ask yourself, are you growing in humility, faith, and wisdom as the years pass? Or are you allowing pride, comparison, and bitterness to take root? Miriam's story is a cautionary tale, but it's also full of grace. She stumbled, but she was restored. And that same grace is available to us today. How will you write the final chapter of your life? What stood out most to you from Miriam's story? Drop a comment and let's discuss. And if this story has blessed you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Scriptures in Pictures TV for more inspiring Bible stories brought to life. Stay tuned for our next powerful story, because when faith meets action, history is made. See you in the next episode.